أحداث 11 من أيلول سبتمبر بين أمريكا والقاعدة، إنذارات بحدوثها لم يؤخذ بها، تعاون متعمد أم فشل استخباراتي؟ تغلغل أجهزة الاستخبارات الأمريكية في القاعدة وأخواتها. 11 من أيلول سبتمبر بين المؤامرة والإرهاب. معكم زينب الصفار، تابعونا. هو 11 من أيلول سبتمبر أضحى تاريخاً لمأساة آلاف قضوا تحت أنقاض برجي التجارة العالميين، وتاريخاً لمآسي مئات الآلاف من الذين قضوا في حروب شنت بذريعة الانتقام لضحايا هذين البرجين. بعد الحادث مباشرة أعلنت إدارة بوش الابن أن تنظيم القاعدة المتخذ من أفغانستان مقراً له هو المسؤول، فشنت حربها على أفغانستان في العام نفسه. عام 2002 أصدرت لائحة بما سمي دول محور الشر التي ضمت العراق وإيران وكوريا الشمالية، وألحقت بها فيما بعد سوريا وليبيا وكوبا. وفي 2003 شنت حربها على العراق بحجة أسلحة دمار شامل لدى نظام صدام حسين. ومنذ ذلك العام دخلت منطقة الشرق الأوسط أتون حرب سميت الحرب على الإرهاب. بعد مرور عقد ونصف من الزمن، تفاصيل حصرية عن الأحداث التي سبقت 11 من أيلول سبتمبر وعما تلاها تكشفها المسؤولة السابقة في CIA سوزان لانداور، التي رئيست القناة الخلفية لتنسيق العلاقة ولمناهضة ما يسمى بالإرهاب مع سفارات العراق وليبيا وسوريا وماليزيا منذ العام 96 وحتى تاريخ غزو العراق. Susan, Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul said to the CBS network that he thinks flawed U.S. foreign policy contributed to the causes that led to the September 11th terrorist attacks, though he stopped short of saying that it was actually America's fault. Why is 9/11 so important, still so important?
America used 9/11 to justify its war with Iraq. The problem for the world is that those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat them. And they got away with it the first time, and there's a very grave danger that they're going to do it again. In fact, some of us in Washington believe that another 9/11 false flag terrorist attack will be used against the city of New York. Specifically, we have a good idea.
Do you think, or do you have information?
We think. We are hypothesizing.
You speculate.
We are speculating, but we are very worried about it because they did succeed the first time in driving the United States into war with Iraq. And it was not, I am one of the people who gave advance warning about 9/11.
But Susan, 9/11 was based not on speculations, was based on information that you had.
We had definitely, I personally was told about the 9/11 attack in April and May of 2001, and I learned about it from my CIA handler, Dr. Richard Fuse. And I have good reason to believe that he learned about it from Israel and the CIA. And we know that these two work very closely together.
So why didn't the U.S. administration attempt to thwart the attack since it had prior to the attack warnings?
Well, first of all, let me tell you how I learned about it and what I was told to do about it.
Right. Tell me the details.
Okay. I learned about 9/11 from my CIA handler in April and May of 2001. I was instructed to go to his office and to deliver a message to the Iraqi embassy through my back channel at the United Nations. I was designated throughout the 1990s as the go-to, as the liaison to the Iraqi embassy, and I had meetings with the Iraqi embassy about every 3 weeks for 7 or 8 years. And the primary focus of my relations was anti-terrorism. So if Iraq had any information about terrorism, we had a relationship and they would give this information to me. Now, In April, I was instructed to go to them and demand information on airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. I was instructed to tell them that if they discovered any information about this conspiracy and failed to give it to the United States...
Why the Iraqis in particular?
Okay, hold on. If they failed to give us this intelligence, then the United States would declare war on Iraq. And so what Ron Paul is saying by this is a failed foreign policy or a flawed foreign policy is Ron Paul knows what...
He stopped, though, from saying
that
I
realize that.
Yes.
I know. But he is a politician and he has to stop. He can only say so much because America is only willing to hear so much. America is only willing to deal with the truth about 9/11 to a certain degree. But the idea that the United States government has actually done this to itself deeply upsets Americans. And sometimes they get very angry when you tell them the facts. They get very upset. And so politicians are notorious for holding back what they know the people cannot tolerate hearing.
Yeah. Okay. So Susan, I want you here to, since you're going to talk about the minute details of the message that you were asked to deliver to the Iraqis and then what happened later. Tell me, how did you operate since you were sent to deliver this message to the Iraqis, and what happened then?
What I did was I communicated the message, and my CIA handler told me to come back and tell him what they said. And I said, well, I was very polite. I instructed them that we would like them to pass this message back to Baghdad, and if Baghdad heard anything, they should come tell us. And my CIA handler said, I did not tell you to be polite. I told you to threaten them with war. And he was shouting and screaming and stomping up and down. He said, we're going to attack Iraq harder than they have ever been attacked before. And I want you to go back to New York and tell them what I am saying to you right now. This threat of war originates at the highest levels of government, above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State. And we are demanding that they hand over this intelligence on this conspiracy involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center. And so I did this, and I knew then it was serious. I knew by the end of April this was a very serious problem, and they were very upset about it. But they already knew. I also knew and told friends in the spring and summer of 2001, I told civilians, friends of mine, that we expected the attack at the end of the summer or the early fall. So late August or September. So I knew
So the information was that accurate?
The information was, we knew exactly the target, we knew exactly the type of attack, we knew the approximate time frame. All through this, okay, so Iraq's response was very sad. I have told you before about the Comprehensive Peace Framework. Iraq said, well, we have already offered to allow you to send the FBI into Baghdad to conduct terrorism investigations. If you think this attack is imminent, why don't you send the FBI? Mm-hmm. Now, this is very important because Iraq was trying to cooperate. George Bush did not want Iraq's cooperation. He was, in my opinion, it is absolutely so wicked and malevolent. He was willing to sacrifice the lives of American citizens and other citizens from around the world in this attack because they had already decided that if the attack was, if they could maximize the damage, if it would be a big enough attack, they could already rationalize pulling the world into war with Iraq. They'd already decided that, and I was told about this myself, and I am telling you now words that I spoke. This is not what words that other people told me they spoke to the Iraqis. This is what I spoke, that the threat originated from George Bush, Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld, and that was what I said.
So what happened next?
Throughout
Susan.
the summer, this was
all through August.
Okay,
let's say. The events.
Even more than that. Mm-hmm. Throughout the summer, June and July, my CIA handler and I spoke about the 9/11 attack practically every meeting we had.
It wasn't 9/11 yet.
It wasn't
9/11. It's going to be particular in
Sure.
9/11.
We did not know the date,
Okay.
but we knew about the scenario of the attack. And so practically every week at our meetings we spoke about this attack, and he kept saying, you must get me any fragment of intelligence. We need the smallest detail. Go back to the Iraqis. He said, Susan, you've got to persuade the Iraqis that they must give you this information because they're planning a war already. They're planning that if he, you know, what was happening was George Bush was prepping the intelligence community to expect that war with Iraq would be the inevitable consequence of an airplane hijacking strike on the World Trade Center.
Why did they go to Afghanistan then?
Yeah, it's another thing. They had to do Afghanistan. Afghanistan was a byproduct. It's a tragedy. But they had to go into Afghanistan so that they could justify Iraq.
Because they thought perhaps
Terrible.
Afghanistan, that's easy to finish Afghanistan and then move on to Iraq.
It was so foolish. And this is the flawed foreign policy that Ron Paul is talking about. In August,
Susan,
the chatter at the intelligence community was so high about this, and it was not very small. It was big. There was a lot of,
Susan,
excuse me.
Yes, when did your concern move actually from hypothetical scenario to the fact that there is actively going to be something planned as an attack?
May of 2001.
Why?
Because of his reaction when he became so angry that I had not communicated the message
Dr.
properly.
Fuse, yes.
Yes, but throughout the summer we talked about it all the time. By August, I can tell you the exact days.
Go ahead,
on
please.
August 2nd, the United States Senate held confirmation hearings for Robert Mueller to head the FBI. He was going to be the new FBI director. On that day, Richard Fuse told me, he said to me, what if there is no FBI director when this attack occurs? And I said, do you mean the attack is that close? Do you think it's imminent? And he said, oh yes, the attack is imminent, definitely. And I said to him, well, I will go back to New York immediately and I will find out if my diplomatic contacts have heard anything from Baghdad. And he responded to me saying, no, it's too dangerous. Do not go back to New York again. I want you to stay out of New York City. We are expecting airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center and the possible use of a miniature thermonuclear device. We definitely expected the building to come down. We never expected the building to survive. And this becomes very important later on.
We will talk in the course of our interview about the bomb and
yes, on August
the details.
4th, on August 4th, I made my last trip to New York. And 2 days later, it had to be immediately. Richard Fuse was adamant. It had to be an immediate visit. And so I went up on August 4th. On August 6th...
Weren't you afraid of going to New York?
I knew that I'm not afraid of dangerous situations. I'm notoriously not afraid when I should be.
Okay.
But honestly, I knew I was also protecting myself because I had no intention of going back to New York after I ran this through Baghdad. I knew that I would not be returning. I made a decision. I knew that I would not be returning to New York again until after the attack. So I had to go right away. I did not spend the night. I went up the morning and came back to Washington that afternoon. And I said, from that moment on, I will not go back until after the attack is over. That's how confident we were it was going to happen. On August 6th, I had a meeting with Richard Fuse in his office, and we planned what we were going to try to do about it. And this August 6th was the day that George Bush was down in Crawford, Texas, and the head of the CIA operations, Richard Clark, handed him a memo describing the 9/11 attack, and George Bush threw it aside and said, well, now you've covered your behind. Can I say that? Now you've covered your behind. Aren't you glad you got that out of the way? Let's go shoot some golf. And meanwhile, in Washington, the CIA was going crazy. Was very worried.
He was dealing indifferently.
He did not care at all. Did not care. He knew exactly. And the briefing memo was much more precise than any of you actually realize. We were very precise about what we expected.
I'm afraid we have to stop for a short break, and then we'll be back to continue on the details of 9/11 attacks.
Okay.
short break and we'll be back. Stay tuned. Susan, who did you warn about the attack and what happened afterwards?
Well, this was very interesting in a tragic sense. We were highly agitated about the attack. Our agitation was rising to frantic levels, and I was instructed on August 6th to make a telephone call to the private offices of Attorney General John Ashcroft, who was running the Justice Department, and he oversaw all of the law enforcement and all of the immigration and all of these things that would have been able to work together to stop the attack and to gather intelligence on the attack. So what I did was I had been working in anti-terrorism for many years. I had a phone number directly into his staff, and I called him and called his staff, and I asked for what's called an emergency broadcast alert across all federal agencies, that they should make this an emergency priority. We were seeking actionable intelligence on airplane hijackings. The target was known to be the World Trade Center, and we expected the possible use of a miniature thermonuclear device, that we expected mass casualties and environmental damage which would make the area unsafe. Okay, so the breathing would be bad, potential radiation contamination.
So it would be a catastrophic situation.
It would be a catastrophic situation. And I was instructed to tell them that I had just, that I was the asset covering Iraq and Libya, and because I would get their attention that way.
How did they react?
Well, the staff, the personal staff, immediately gave me a phone number at the Office of Counterterrorism, and they asked me to repeat what I had just said to them. However, when they gave the information to John Ashcroft, I am told that John Ashcroft had a very different attitude. He was very calm, and he said, "Oh, those CIA, they keep talking about this airplane attack. Forget it, don't worry about that. They're overreacting, they're hysterical." And of course we knew.
Susan, do you have evidence that supports all what you've been describing and talking about?
We had testimony in federal court from one of the witnesses who I had, a private civilian whose family lives in New York and who spent, or in Connecticut outside New York, and I had told him about the attacks, and he is a very credible witness, and he testified in a courthouse 1,000 feet away from the World Trade Center that this was true.
What about the phone calls and everything? Are they tapped? Were they tapped?
Oh yes, yes. We have my story is verifiable. We have 28,000 phone calls tapped because of the Patriot Act.
Thanks to the Patriot Act.
Thanks to the Patriot Act, they recorded everything. Yes.
Now, you were talking a bit about how the Bush administration, they knew about the attack. Are you saying that, is this an evidence that some elements of the Bush administration were actually complicit in the 9/11 attacks, and that they actually helped one way or another, maybe indirectly, stage this attack?
In America, there are two camps. One is the let it happen, and they made it happen. I am of the opinion that both happened. It was very easy to stop this attack. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Command, was running military exercises from September 10th to September 12th. It would have been very easy to notify them so that they could protect America's airspace. They could have put anti-aircraft guns on top of the World Trade Center. It was very easy to do. The problem was that the Bush administration absolutely did not want to stop this attack, because they had already decided that if they could maximize the damage, they would go to war with Iraq.
So you believe that there wasn't only the hijackings, but there was also the controlled demolitions?
Yes, I believe that that it was like a magician's trick. While everyone's eyes were on what the left hand was doing, those are the airplanes flying over the water and slamming into the buildings. The real action that brought down the buildings was a controlled demolition. Every crime requires motive and opportunity, and once you understand that there was several months advance notice, advance warning about 9/11, there was plenty of opportunity to figure out how to bring those buildings down and to get the explosives into place. We know that, the motive, of course, was the Iraqi war. And we know that pro-Zionists, American and Israeli, both of them, we know that Israel, I will come back and ask me that again, how Israel knew about this, how I am absolutely positive Israel knew about this.
How?
On the morning of 9/11, my CIA handler told me that the Israeli Mossad had waited outside with a video camera queued up to record the airplanes striking into the building. And he said, how often do you think that a man and woman just happen to be standing on a street corner with a video camera ready to record an accident? He said, it never happens. At most, your arms are whipping around. You know, and in this case, it was all calm and still, and they were all ready to go. And we know that they knew.
So what evidence supports the idea of the controlled demolitions?
The firefighters heard bombs popping as the building was coming down. Also, we know that the parking security tapes on the nights between August 23rd and September 3rd captured strange vans arriving at the World Trade Center between the hours of 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. And they were waiting until after they definitely were not the janitorial trucks. They waited until after the janitorial crews had left the building, and then they arrived. And there were 3 or 4 at a time, and they were carrying a group of men. And the men are seen coming in and out of the van. Okay, the vans, plural. And they knew the markings of they knew the markings of the van. They knew what they looked like. They were able to identify them, and these vans had never appeared at the World Trade Center at that particular hour ever in history. This was different, and after September 3rd, they never came back.
So what type of bomb?
It was a thermite bomb that thermite explodes at very high, has the capacity has a high heat yield, and it burns at such high intensity that it can melt steel. When it combines with sulfur, it produces dust. So this was, and thermite traces were found in the dust that was collected. So we know what type of bomb it was.
Who owns such a bomb, Susan?
Thermite bombs are owned by the United States government.
So there's no jihadi plot after all, in your opinion?
Oh. This was a conspiracy to make it look like a jihadi plot. Mohammed Atta was a CIA asset who was being run to infiltrate the conspiracy. However, what was happening is they were manipulating it. They were taking something that would have been very small with minimal impact, and they were deliberately expanding it. To make sure that it would have the maximum impact so that it could achieve their ends. And that's very different than saying that it is a jihadi plot. It is somewhat made and manufactured in the United States of America, unfortunately. Now that does not mean that...
Just to add to this thing that you're saying, that according to the memoirs of former head of the CIA, George Tenet, that between the beginning of April 2001 and up till the 9/11 attacks, the Civil Aviation Agency has prepared at least 105 brief daily intelligence reports about 9/11. And despite all this prior to the attack warnings, how could it succeed? It's because
because they wanted it to succeed. That's the point. Everything had to go right for these hijackers in order for this to work. And it just doesn't happen that way. They made sure that this was going to be carried off smoothly.
And this parallels the message that was delivered to General Wesley Clark later afterwards.
Within a week after 9/11, Wesley Clark was visiting the Pentagon, and a general came up to him and said, "Hey, did you get the memo? Apparently we're going to be attacking 5 Arab countries in the next 5 years. We are going after Iraq, Libya, Iran, Syria, and Lebanon. You are not exempt from this. When I see what's happening right now with Libya, I am very concerned, and I know, for example, I have seen documentation that Israel promised financial support for the rebels in exchange for a military base in the Green Mountains where there is gold mining, and essentially Israel wants to put in a base so that they, with military protection, so that they can mine Libya's gold and take away their profits.
How did you know about that?
Once you're in this mafia, you are never out of it.
Right.
You always get things.
And what you're saying is that this assures the fact that the July 2006 war against Lebanon was American-made.
American-Israeli. It is very, you must always remember that these two to go together.
Yes, the American and Israeli intelligence are always working in cahoots.
Yes.
You know, together concerning all these wars in the region.
And this is very important.
Particularly 9/11 too.
This is very important because we are afraid right now in Washington. There is talk, we are worried that there could be another attack on the United States, on the financial district, probably involving a miniature thermonuclear device. We expect it to ratchet up from 9/11. It has to be bigger than 9/11. And it will be used to drive the United States into war with Iran. We are very concerned about this. And if you see, the reason that I'm talking about this now in the Arab world, if you see this attack, you must learn from history, and you must know what really happened in 9/11, because the tragedy is the Arabs and the Muslims have suffered more than anybody from the 9/11 attack. And we are greatly concerned that they're going to do it again, especially because Israel is pushing so hard for war with Iran, and Obama is faced with a choice, supporting the middle class or Tel Aviv, and so far Obama is standing with America's middle class, as he should, and that makes it more dangerous because the Israelis got away with 9/11. In my opinion, Israel was heavily tied into 9/11.
Former CIA asset Ms. Susan Landau, thanks a million for joining us.
You're welcome.
إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل. تابعونا من كل الميادين. إلى اللقاء.